Amber was the last to arrive. Her 3 friends were already sitting around the fire. The sounds of laughter echoed in the darkness. She took a deep breath, then slipped through the wedged-open gate and headed toward the fire. Beer bottles, joints, and candy wrappers already littered the ground. Amber wrinkled her nose and made a mental note to ask everyone to clean up before they left, knowing it would elicit whoops and shrugs. Her friends saw Radcliffe Manor as a fun, maybe haunted, touristy place to hang out. They didn't care about its history. Amber used to think Joe did too, but that was before. Amber joined her friends around the campfire, sitting on a log at the edge of the light. "You're late," Jordan said without looking up. She tapped the burning pit with a thin branch, shooting sparks into the air. "Forgot my mask," Amber replied. "Had to drive back." "Are we ready?" Luther interrupted. Joe looked anywhere but at Amber. "We're ready." They'd found this game online, buried in a list of more familiar options, like a gold tooth in an ordinary smile. In between references to Ouija sessions, tarot decks, and urban legends was a game called The Mask. The rules are simple. On Halloween night, gather as a group somewhere close to the dead. Radcliffe had his own cemetery on the property. The estate was extensive and included acres of woods, a 3-story house, and small outbuildings preserved through the local historical society. A rough wood fence with split railings enclosed the main area of the estate. Best of all for the game, Radcliffe was isolated and closed to visitors at night. Everyone had to bring a new mask, dress in all black, and then make a fire in a certain way. Then everyone had to get completely mind-blowingly drunk. If all went well and the spirits found the players interesting, some would join the group while they played their game, imitating the living. At the end, they would vote on who was real and who was a guest from the other side of the world. Amber and her friends sat around for another hour, drinking, sharing candy, and feeding the fire. Eyes squeezed shut, head swollen, Amber felt outwardly calm but anxious. She kept fiddling with the plastic mask in her purse. Something in the October air seemed thin, fragile to her, an expectation. "Maybe we shouldn't play," Amber said. Luther chuckled and rolled his eyes. "I told you so. Amba Pati Dumpna's bouncing around again." "Go easy on her," Joe said, but Amber could see a hint of his smile in the flicker of the fire. Jordan stretched out his long legs clad in black jeans. Amber noticed Jordan's bare feet sink to the edge of Joe's log. Obsessed. "Have another drink or 2 or 3, Jordan suggested. "Then we'll get started." Amber hesitated. The campfire was drawing purple and black shadows across her friends' faces. All so pretty, trim, and young, carefree, or at least carefree. In that moment, she resented how little they seemed to respect Radcliffe or the game, but she obeyed Jordan. Another half-hour passed, and the fire began to grow hot. This foursome was that special kind of drunkenness that only happens on Halloween. Jordan moved over to share Joe's seat. "Let's get started then," Joe said. Jordan slowly stood up. "Remember, no cheating, no peeking. Go until the campfire and everyone else is out of sight. Put on your mask and sneak back from the other direction. If we're lucky, a few new friends might join us. Oh, and no flashlights or cell phones. We need to keep it a secret." They went their separate ways. Amber stumbled on the uneven ground, nearly crashing into a tree at the edge of the lawn. Turning around, she could still see the campfire, so she squeezed through into the woods. The night was growing colder, and Amber shuddered, wishing she'd worn something thicker than a sweatshirt. Above her, blue fall stars dusted the sky. Amber thought she heard movement ahead of her in the woods, and then laughter. She put on her mask, a white cat, and quickly headed back. As Amber approached the campfire, she froze. Her friends had returned and were already seated. There were 4 people sitting on the logs and stumps that ringed the fire. "Oh shit," one of them said, his voice an unrecognizable rumble. The person who spoke was wearing a jester's mask. Amber also saw a gray wolf, a robot, and a skull. All 4 were facing her. "Who are you?" the robot asked, and again she couldn't recognize the voice. The wolf shook its head. "No, you don't have to tell us yet. Sit down." "That's pretty damn wild," Skull chuckled. "Seriously, what are you all trying to pull?" Amber sat down as far away from the others as she could. "What's going on?" She realized with surprise that she didn't recognize her own voice. It sounded distant and flat. Jester tossed another branch into the fire. Sounds like one of two things. Someone here is fucking with us and sneaked another friend in, or Jester shifted his gaze from mask to mask. The game worked, and one of you doesn't belong. Or maybe you are the pretender, Wolf suggested. How can we tell? Asked Amber. No one spoke. The only sound was the occasional popping of the fire. The fire burned well, but the light was weak and the heat was almost non-existent. Amber shuddered as a winter breeze blew across the yard. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and Amber's breath rushed out like steam. The robot cleared his throat. What if we... Without warning, the flames dwindled to embers, and there was no light at all. Amber heard cursing, bodies moving, hitting each other. Just as suddenly as it went out, the fire roared again. Oh my God, someone whispered. What the fuck? There were dozens of masked figures around the fire now. Some sat until they filled the logs, the rest stood in a circle. Amber saw animal masks and monster masks, plague doctors and masquerade masks. Everyone was dressed in black and she couldn't recognize anyone. This is fucked up, came a voice from the crowd. This is fucked up. Several voices echoed back. Every word spoken by one person was repeated by the crowd. What's going on? Stop, Joe. Please stop, Jordan. Where is everyone? Please stop, please stop, please stop, please stop, please stop. The crowd was getting more and more agitated. Bodies crowded around Amber, squeezing through to sit next to her, hovering over her at her sides. The light from the bonfire faded again, then flared, exposing more masked figures in the courtyard, hundreds of them. As the fire settled low and without heat, Amber could see eyes glowing in the darkness behind the masks, like wild animals biding their time with the patience of a predator. Help, Amber screamed. I don't want to be here. Please, someone, please. She began to sob. The entire crowd turned to look at her. Is that Amber? Came a voice from the night. Is she crying? Crying again, crying again. A chorus of familiar voices rang out. They sounded like Amber's friends, but they came from all directions. Stop it, Amber whispered. I want to go home. I told you she wouldn't want to play. A dozen voices combined, and they all sounded like Luther. Found another party to fade. It wasn't her fault, Joe's voice said over and over again. Always been a scaredy cat. Always ran away. Poor little Amber, the crowd said, mimicking Jordan. If you weren't so frail, maybe Joe would like you better. Amber lowered her head. Stop, shut up, shut up, shut up. It was so cold Amber couldn't stop shivering. The grass beneath her feet was brittle, flecked with frost. She tore at her mask, electric panic burning her nerves. Even when she dug her nails into her skin hard enough to make it bleed, the cheap plastic stuck. The game isn't over, voices called out one after another. Keep your masks on. Amber heard other voices weaving in, familiar voices, but they were drowned out by the chorus. Beneath the words she heard other sounds, animal sounds, cries, laughter, and growls. The fire dimmed and Amber could only see shadows. Guess, guess, excited voices shouted. Someone has to guess. Who's real and who's pretending? Let Amber do it. It sounded like Joe. Amber, 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 Amber. I don't know, she said. Don't make me. You have to choose, said one voice, clear and cold in her head. Who's real? Who is pretending? Who has to go? All of you, Amber whispered. None of you are real. None of you care. She thought about the way Luther always rolled his eyes when she had something to say, about Jordan's smirk and her leg lying next to Joe's, about how Joe... You're all fake and you can go to hell for all I care, Amber said, closing her eyes. Good, the voice agreed. When Amber looked up, she was alone. The area around the Radcliffe house was empty. It was just her and the bonfire. She pulled off her mask and threw it into the flames. It burned brightly. Amber sat and stared at the fire, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Once she was almost calm, she picked up the flashlight on her phone and swept it across the yard. The bottles and trash she'd noticed earlier were still strewn across the lawn, but there were no other signs of her friend's presence. None of them answered when she called them. She almost left Joe a voicemail, but couldn't think of what to say. It wasn't real, Amber said aloud, getting up to leave. It's all a trick, an act, a game. Heading for the gate, Amber promised herself that she would come back in the morning and track down Luther, Jordan, and Joe. At least she'd clean up the mess they'd left behind.